10-year-old walks into biker bar. With a drawing, "He took my twin brother." They didn't hesitate. The neon beer signs cast a soft glow across the worn wooden bar where Big Jack sat, his massive frame perched on a bar stool that seemed too small for his bulk. His leather vest, adorned with patches and the distinctive Hell's Angels insignia, creaked as he reached for his bottle of beer. The evening had settled into that comfortable lull when stories flowed as freely as the drinks. "Remember that time in Sturgis?" Chuck, a fellow biker with a salt and pepper beard, chuckled from 2 seats down. "When Big here had to ride through that storm?" Jack's weathered face cracked into a smile, the lines around his eyes deepening. "Lightning striking all around me. Thought I was going to end up extra crispy that night. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story." The bar erupted in laughter. It was their favorite kind of evening. Nothing to prove, no fights to break up, just brothers sharing memories. The jukebox in the corner played old country songs, the kind that told stories about hard lives and redemption. Mike, the bartender, slid another cold one toward Jack. "On the house, big man." He knew Jack's routine: 3 beers, never more. Even in this rough crowd, Jack was known for keeping his head straight. The wood-paneled walls held decades of history, photos of riders long gone, license plates from across the country, and memories that only the oldest members could recall. Jack's eyes drifted to a particular photograph, yellowed with age, showing younger versions of themselves standing proud beside their bikes. "We were something else back then," Tommy, one of the older members, said softly, following Jack's gaze. "Thought we could take on the whole world." Jack nodded, taking another sip. "Still can, old-timer. Just got smarter about picking our battles." The evening continued in this peaceful rhythm. Someone told a joke about a priest and a biker, and even the toughest guys in the room couldn't help but laugh. The smell of leather and cigarette smoke hung in the air, mixing with the scent of spilled beer and distant memories. Jack listened as the others traded stories, his massive hands wrapped around his bottle. Despite his intimidating size, there was a gentleness in how he handled things, whether it was his custom Harley or the delicate glass bottle in his grip. "Hey, Jack," Chuck called out again. "Tell them about that time in Mexico when you—" The heavy wooden door of the bar creaked open, cutting Chuck's words short. A blast of cool evening air swept in, making the flames of the candles on the tables dance. The conversation died immediately as heads turned toward the entrance. There, standing in the doorway, was a small boy, no more than 10 years old. His presence was so unexpected, so out of place in this rough establishment, that even the jukebox seemed to go quiet. The boy's sneakers squeaked against the wooden floor as he took a tentative step inside, clutching what looked like a piece of paper in his small hands. The silence in the bar grew heavier as the child's eyes scanned the room, moving past the leather-clad bikers until they settled on Big Jack. The boy's face showed fear, but there was something else there too. Determination, maybe even hope. The paper in his hands trembled slightly as he stood there, a lost soul in a sea of tough men. The contrast couldn't have been starker. This small, vulnerable figure amid the tattooed arms and gruff faces of the Hell's Angels. Not a single biker moved, all of them watching this unusual scene unfold in their sanctuary. The boy's sneakers scuffed against the wooden floor as he made his way through the maze of tables. His small frame looked even tinier next to the towering bikers, who watched him with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. The paper in his hands shook slightly, but his chin was held high despite his obvious fear. Coming to a stop beside Big Jack's bar stool, Danny had to crane his neck to look up at the massive biker. The overhead lights caught the tears threatening to spill from his eyes, making them glisten. His free hand clutched the hem of his wrinkled t-shirt, twisting it nervously. "Sir?" His voice came out barely above a whisper. Are you Big Jack?" Jack turned slowly on his stool, his expression softening as he looked down at the child. "That's what they call me, kid." His deep voice rumbled like distant thunder, but he kept his tone gentle. Danny thrust the paper forward with trembling hands. "I drew this. It's the truck they used." Big Jack carefully took the crumpled paper, holding it delicately between his massive fingers. The drawing showed a crude sketch of what appeared to be a delivery truck, done in blue crayon. There were dark windows and what looked like flames painted on the side. "My name's Danny," the boy continued, his voice growing shakier. "They took my brother, my twin brother Tommy." His bottom lip quivered as he spoke the words. The bikers exchanged confused glances. Chuck leaned forward, his beer forgotten. "What do you mean, took, kid?" "Kidnapped him," Danny said, the word coming out in a rush of breath. 3 days ago, after school." His small hands balled into fists at his sides. "Nobody believes me. The police said he probably just ran away, but Tommy wouldn't do that. He wouldn't leave me." Big Jack studied the drawing more closely, his weathered face grave. "Why'd you come here, Danny? Why us?" "Because—" Danny swallowed hard, gathering his courage. "Because I heard people talking. They said you help people sometimes, that you're not afraid of anyone." His voice cracked slightly. "Please, he's my brother. We've never been apart this long before." The silence in the bar grew heavier. Some of the bikers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others stared into their drinks. The weight of the boy's plea hung in the air like smoke. Big Jack set the drawing carefully on the bar and looked at Danny for a long moment. There was something in the boy's eyes, a mix of desperation and hope, that stirred something deep inside the old biker's heart. Slowly, deliberately, Big Jack stood up from his stool. His massive frame seemed to block out the light as he rose to his full height, casting a long shadow that enveloped Danny completely. The boy had to take a step back just to see his face. "Listen to me, kid," Big Jack said, his voice firm but kind. "If someone took your brother, we're gonna find him. You have my word on that." The bar fell into stunned silence. Even the usual creaks and groans of the old building seemed to still. The other bikers stared at their leader, knowing that when Big Jack gave his word, it was as good as done. Danny's eyes widened, hope blooming across his face like sunrise. "You believe me?" "Yeah, kid, I believe you." Big Jack guided Danny to a quiet corner booth, away from the curious stares of the other bikers. The leather seats creaked as they settled in, and Jack noticed how the boy's feet barely touched the floor. A waitress brought over a glass of cola for Danny and another beer for Jack, her face softening at the sight of the child. "Tell me everything you remember," Big Jack said, leaning forward. His massive arms rested on the worn wooden table, hands clasped together. "Every detail matters." Danny wrapped his small hands around the cold glass, taking a careful sip before speaking. "It was after school, 3 days ago. Tommy and I always walk home together, but I had to stay late for math help." His voice trembled slightly. "When I finally got out, he wasn't at our usual meeting spot." "Did anyone see what happened?" Jack asked, his voice gentle but firm. Danny nodded, his eyes distant. "Mrs. Rodriguez from the corner store. She said she saw Tommy get into a truck." His fingers traced the condensation on his glass. "She tried to stop them, but—" He pulled out the drawing again, smoothing it on the table. "The truck had these weird flames on the side, and she heard one of them say something about the red serpents." At those words, a visible ripple went through the bar. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, and several bikers turned their heads sharply. Chuck, sitting at a nearby table, let out a low whistle. "The Red Serpents?" Big Jack's face darkened, his jaw tightening. "You're sure about that name?" "Yes, sir." Danny looked up, confused by the reaction. "Do you know them?" Whispers spread through the bar like wildfire. "Those crazy bastards are at it again," someone muttered. "Taking kids now?" another voice added with disgust. Big Jack's hands clenched into fists on the table. The Red Serpents had been terrorizing their town for months. Extortion, violence, drug trafficking. But kidnapping a child? That crossed a line that made his blood boil. "They've gone too far this time," Big Jack growled, his voice carrying across the now silent bar. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Chuck, get the boys together. We're gonna need every weapon we've got." The bar erupted into movement. Bikers began making calls. Others headed to their bikes to fetch hidden arsenals. The atmosphere changed from stunned silence to focused determination. Danny watched with wide eyes as the bar transformed into what looked like a war room. Are you really going to help find Tommy?" Big Jack knelt down beside the booth, bringing himself eye level with Danny. Despite his massive size and the anger burning in his eyes, his voice was gentle. "Listen to me, kid. Those men? They've been causing trouble in our town for too long. But taking your brother?" He shook his head slowly. "That's something we won't stand for. Not here, not ever." The boy's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of hope. Around them, the sound of motorcycles roaring to life filled the air as bikers rushed to gather their supplies. Big Jack stood back up, his full height casting a shadow across the table. "The Red Serpents want to play rough?" He looked around at his assembled brothers, each one nodding in grim determination. "Then we'll show them what real rough looks like." Danny reached into his worn backpack, pulling out a creased photograph. His small hand smoothed it carefully before holding it out to Big Jack. "This is me and Tommy," he said softly. "It was taken last summer at the park." Big Jack took the photo, his weathered hands gentle with the fragile paper. The afternoon sun streamed through the bar's grimy windows, casting just enough light to see the image clearly. His eyes scanned the photograph, expecting to see two identical young boys, but what he saw made his breath catch in his throat. The photo showed Danny, all right, his small frame and earnest smile unmistakable. But next to him stood not another 10-year-old boy, but a young man in his early 20s. The man wore a leather vest with familiar patches, his arm draped protectively around Danny's shoulders. Big Jack's hands trembled slightly. He knew that face. Those same determined eyes and strong jaw had belonged to Mickey, the Saint Thompson, one of his own brothers from the club years ago. Mickey had been more than just another member. He'd been family. "Danny?" Big Jack said, his voice hoarse. "This man here? You're saying this is Tommy?" Danny nodded, confusion crossing his face. "Yeah, that's my brother. Why are you looking at him like that?" The other bikers gathered around, peering at the photograph. Chuck let out a low whistle. "Jack, ain't that—" "Mickey's boy," Big Jack finished, his mind racing. Mickey had disappeared 5 years ago after a particularly nasty run-in with a rival gang. They'd searched for weeks but found nothing. Now, staring at this photo, pieces of a puzzle he didn't even know existed started falling into place. "Tommy's different," Danny said quietly, misinterpreting their reactions. "The doctor said it's because of his condition. He grows faster than normal. Mom used to say he was special that way." His voice cracked slightly. "But he's still my twin. We were born on the same day." Big Jack sat heavily in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. The bar had grown quiet again. everyone watching, waiting. This wasn't just about a kidnapped kid anymore. This was about family, club family. Did Tommy ever mention the club? Big Jack asked carefully. Or his father? Danny shook his head. He doesn't talk much about before. Mom said it's better that way. Questions swirled in Big Jack's mind like storm clouds. Why had Mickey never told them about his sons? What did the Red Serpents want with Tommy? And most importantly, was this connected to Mickey's disappearance? But looking at Danny's worried face, Big Jack pushed his questions aside. The boy didn't need his confusion right now. He needed his strength. Big Jack placed a heavy hand on Danny's shoulder, meeting his eyes. Listen, kid. This doesn't change anything about finding your brother. If anything, it makes it more important. He gestured to the bikers around them. Tommy's not just your family. He's ours too, and we take care of our own. Danny's eyes lit up with hope. Really? Really, Big Jack confirmed, his voice firm despite the turmoil in his mind. We're going to get him back. That's a promise. The other bikers nodded in agreement, their faces set with renewed determination. But as Danny smiled with relief, Big Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into something much bigger than a simple kidnapping. The photograph in his hand felt heavy with unspoken secrets, but for now, those would have to wait. Tommy needed them, and that was all that mattered. The black van rumbled down the dark streets, its engine a low growl in the quiet night. Big Jack sat in the passenger seat, his large frame making the seat look small. Chuck, his most trusted friend, drove carefully while three other bikers, Mike, Ray, and Diesel, sat in the middle row. In the very back, Danny huddled between their leather jackets and gear, still holding the photograph. Take a left here, Big Jack said, pointing to a narrow street. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating empty sidewalks and closed shops. Word is the Red Serpents have been spotted around this area. Danny pressed his face against the window, scanning every shadow and alley they passed. His small hands tightened on the photo, crumpling it slightly before he carefully smoothed it out again. You doing okay back there, kid? Diesel turned around, his long beard nearly touching Danny's knee. Despite his intimidating size, his eyes were kind. Yeah, Danny nodded, though his voice trembled slightly. I keep thinking about Tommy. He must be so scared. Big Jack watched the boy in the rearview mirror. Your brother's tough, Danny. He's got Thompson blood in him. The words came out gruffer than he intended, memories of Mickey still fresh in his mind. Chuck turned onto a wider street lined with industrial buildings. Remember when Mickey took on 3 guys outside Joe's bar? He said, trying to lighten the mood. Man never backed down from a fight. That's Tommy, Danny said quietly. He never gives up either, even when the kids at school make fun of him for being different. The van fell silent, each man lost in his own thoughts. Ray pulled out his phone, checking a message. Got word from Spider. Says he saw some suspicious activity near the old Phillips warehouse. Might be worth checking out. Big Jack nodded. Chuck? On it, Chuck replied, taking the next right turn. The streets became rougher, filled with potholes and broken glass that crunched under the tires. They drove past abandoned factories and empty lots until the Phillips warehouse came into view. It was a massive structure of corroded metal and broken windows, its walls covered in graffiti. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, but there was a clear gap where someone had cut through. Chuck killed the engine, letting the van coast to a stop in the shadow of a nearby building. The silence felt heavy as they all stared at the warehouse. I see light, Mike whispered, pointing to a faint glow coming from one of the upper windows. Big Jack turned to face the group. All right, listen up. We do this smart. No rushing in. Mike and Ray, circle around back. Diesel, you're with me and Chuck at the front. He looked at Danny. You stay in the van, understand? Lock the doors and don't open them for anyone but us. Danny started to protest, but stopped when he saw Big Jack's stern expression. But what if... No buts, Big Jack said firmly. Tommy needs you safe. Can you do that for him? Danny nodded reluctantly, clutching the photo closer to his chest. The bikers checked their weapons. Nothing lethal, just enough to defend themselves if needed. They moved silently, their boots barely making a sound on the cracked pavement. The warehouse loomed before them, its broken windows like empty eyes watching their approach. Chuck touched Big Jack's arm, pointing to fresh tire tracks in the dirt. Someone had been here recently. The bikers exchanged looks, years of working together making words unnecessary. They spread out, moving into position, ready for whatever they might find inside. Inside the warehouse, stale air and darkness greeted the bikers. Their footsteps echoed off the concrete floor as they moved between towering metal shelves and abandoned machinery. The weak moonlight filtering through broken windows cast strange shadows across their path. Big Jack held up his fist, signaling the others to stop. Voices drifted from around the corner, accompanied by the flicker of electric lanterns. Chuck and Diesel flanked him, while Mike and Ray maintained their position by the back entrance. I'm telling you, man, Snake's got something big planned, a young voice said, followed by the distinct sound of a can being crushed. Shut up about it, another voice hissed. You know we're not supposed to talk about... Big Jack stepped into view, his massive frame blocking the light. 3 young men sat on wooden crates, playing cards scattered between them. They jumped to their feet, reaching for weapons, but froze when they saw the other bikers emerging from the shadows. Evening, boys, Big Jack's voice rumbled through the space. Let's have a chat. The youngest of the 3, barely out of his teens, backed up against a metal shelf. We ain't got nothing to say to you. Chuck and Diesel spread out, cutting off any escape routes. The gang members' eyes darted between them, calculating their odds. I'm looking for a boy, Big Jack said, taking a step forward. 10 years old. Name's Tommy. He watched their faces carefully, noting the flash of recognition in their eyes. The tallest gang member, sporting a fresh snake tattoo on his neck, tried to look tough. Never heard of him. Big Jack moved faster than someone his size should be able to, closing the distance in 2 strides. He grabbed the man's shirt, lifting him slightly off his feet. Want to try that answer again? Hey man, take it easy. The 3rd gang member raised his hands. We just watched the warehouse. We don't know nothing about no kid. But you know something, Chuck said, his voice deadly calm. Start talking. The youngest one cracked first. All we know is Snake's got some special cargo at the old mill. That's all I heard, I swear. Big Jack released the tattooed man, who stumbled backward. The paper mill? Yeah. The young one nodded frantically. But you didn't hear it from us. Snake would kill us if he knew. Shut up, Marcus, the tattooed man snapped, but the damage was done. Big Jack exchanged looks with his crew. The old paper mill was on the other side of town, a massive complex that had been abandoned for years. It would be the perfect place to hide someone. You boys are going to sit tight for a while, Big Jack said, nodding to Diesel. The big biker produced some zip ties from his pocket. You can't do this, the tattooed man protested as Diesel secured their hands. We can, and we are, Chuck said, helping Diesel move the gang members to a corner. Consider it protective custody. Snake won't know you talked if you're tied up here. Big Jack pulled out his phone, sending a quick text to the rest of his crew. Mike, Ray, secure the perimeter. Chuck, call Spider and tell him to bring the van around. We need to move fast. The warehouse fell quiet except for the muffled protests of the bound gang members. Big Jack stared through a broken window at the city lights in the distance, knowing Tommy was out there somewhere. The paper mill would be heavily guarded, and Snake would be expecting them now. "Time to gear up," he told his men. "This is just the beginning." The neon sign of Lou's all-night diner buzzed overhead as Big Jack's crew pulled into the parking lot. It was nearly midnight, but the place was still open, a warm light spilling onto the cracked asphalt. Inside, the smell of coffee and grilled onions filled the air. Danny slid into the red vinyl booth across from Big Jack, while Chuck and Diesel took the adjacent table. The boy's shoulders were slumped with exhaustion, but his eyes remained alert, watching everything. A tired-looking waitress with graying hair approached their table, notepad in hand. "Coffee all around?" Big Jack said, then glanced at Danny. "And a chocolate milk for the kid. Maybe some fries, too." Danny's stomach growled at the mention of food, and for the first time that night, a hint of color returned to his cheeks. The waitress nodded and shuffled away, her shoes squeaking against the checkered floor. "You doing okay, kid?" Big Jack asked, his gruff voice softening. The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows across his weathered face, but his eyes were kind. Danny traced patterns on the laminated menu with his finger. I hope Tommy's okay. He must be so scared." "Listen here." Big Jack leaned forward, his massive arms resting on the table. "Your brother's tough, just like you. And now we know where they're keeping him. That's more than we had an hour ago." The waitress returned with their drinks. Danny wrapped his small hands around the cold glass of chocolate milk, taking a careful sip. A plate of steaming fries appeared in front of him, and Big Jack nudged them closer. "Eat up. You need your strength." Chuck turned in his seat, keeping his voice low. "Spider's checking out the mill from a distance. Says there's movement inside, lots of bikes parked out back." Big Jack nodded, taking a long drink of his coffee. The hot liquid helped clear his head, wash away the dust from the warehouse. Danny picked at his fries, offering one to Big Jack with a small smile. "Thanks, kid." Jack took the fry, watching as Danny's expression brightened slightly. "You know what? You remind me of someone I used to know. Same kind of courage." "Really?" Danny sat up straighter, his eyes curious. "Yeah. Had a friend once who never backed down when things got tough. Always looked out for others, even when he was scared." Big Jack's voice grew distant for a moment, lost in memory. "That's what real bravery is, being scared but doing what's right anyway." Danny nodded, understanding flooding his young face. "Like how Tommy always stands up to bullies at school, even though he's smaller than them." "Exactly like that." Big Jack smiled, a rare sight that transformed his entire face. "And that's why we're going to find him. Because people like that, they're worth fighting for." The boy's eyes welled up with tears, but he quickly wiped them away with his sleeve. He reached across the table and put his small hand on Big Jack's massive forearm. "Thank you for helping us." The tough biker cleared his throat, oddly moved by the simple gesture. Around them, the other bikers pretended not to notice the moment, focusing intently on their coffee cups. Soon, the empty plates were cleared away, and Big Jack threw some bills on the table. The crew stood up, their leather jackets creaking as they moved. Danny slid out of the booth, standing a little taller than before. "Ready?" Big Jack asked, looking down at the boy. Danny nodded firmly. "Ready." They filed out of the diner, the bell above the door chiming softly. Their bikes waited in the parking lot, chrome gleaming under the neon lights. It was time to head to the paper mill, to face whatever waited for them there. But now, with full stomachs and renewed determination, they felt stronger, more prepared for what lay ahead. The neon vacancy sign of the Starlight Motel flickered weakly in the darkness, casting an intermittent red glow across the cracked parking lot. Big Jack sat astride his Harley, studying the two-story building with narrowed eyes. The place had seen better days: peeling paint, rusty railings, and more than a few broken windows covered with cardboard. Danny sat behind him on the bike, his small hands gripping Jack's leather jacket. The rest of the crew, Chuck, Diesel, and Spider, lined up their bikes nearby, engines purring quietly in the night. "This is the place?" Danny whispered, his breath visible in the cool night air. Big Jack nodded, his jaw tight. "According to Spider's contact, some of Snake's crew been spotted coming and going from here?" He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. Every minute that passed was another minute Tommy spent in danger. They dismounted, and Big Jack helped Danny off the bike. The boy's legs were shaky from the long ride, but determination burned in his eyes. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a beat-up pickup truck and a couple of old sedans. "Chuck, take the back," Big Jack commanded in a low voice. "Diesel, watch the stairs. Spider, keep the bikes running." His brothers nodded, moving into position with practiced efficiency. The motel's office was dark, a handwritten "back in 30 minutes" sign taped to the grimy window. Big Jack scanned the second floor, noting the rooms with lights on. Room 207 caught his attention. Heavy curtains drawn, but a sliver of light escaped from the bottom. "Stay close to me, kid," Big Jack muttered as they climbed the metal stairs. Each step creaked under his weight, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet night. Danny followed like a shadow, his footsteps barely making a sound. The second-floor walkway gave them a view of the empty street below. A car passed occasionally, its headlights sweeping across the building before disappearing into the night. The air smelled of old cigarettes and cheaper beer, typical for places like this. Big Jack's leather boots stopped in front of room 207. He could hear muffled voices inside, the sound of a TV playing. His heart pounded harder, not from fear, but from the growing certainty that answers waited on the other side of that door. "Whatever happens," he whispered to Danny, positioning the boy slightly behind him. "You stay behind me, understand?" Danny nodded, his face pale but determined in the dim light. Big Jack took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. The metal of his rings clicked against the door as he knocked, 3 sharp raps that echoed in the stillness. The voices inside went quiet. Footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate. Big Jack's muscles tensed, ready for anything. The lock clicked, and the door creaked open. The face that appeared in the gap stopped Big Jack cold. The years had added lines and scars, but he'd know those snake-like eyes anywhere. Ray, the Rat, Martinez. Once his brother in the club, now a man who'd chosen a darker path. The Rat's eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed to slits. "Well, well," he drawled, "if it ain't Big Jack himself." His gaze shifted to Danny, and something like recognition flickered across his features. "And what's this? Brought yourself a little sidekick?" Big Jack's fists clenched at his sides, old memories of betrayal mixing with fresh anger. The Rat had been more than just a brother. He'd been a friend, until greed and ambition had turned him into something else entirely. The Rat leaned against the doorframe, a cigarette dangling from his lips. The years hadn't been kind to him. His face was weathered, marked with deep lines that spoke of hard living and harder choices. "Things ain't like they used to be, Jack," he drawled, blowing smoke into the night air. "World's changed. We all changed." His eyes flickered to Danny again, a cruel smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Heard you're looking for a kid. Tommy, right?" Big Jack's hand instinctively moved to keep Danny behind him. The boy trembled slightly but stood his ground. "Where is he, Ray?" Big Jack's voice was low, dangerous. The Rat laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the empty corridor. Look at you playing hero. Since when does Big Jack care about some random kid? He took another long drag from his cigarette. Snake's got plans, brother. Big plans. And that kid? He's just a small part of something much bigger. He's just a boy, Big Jack growled, his patience wearing thin. Just a boy? The rat's smile widened. Nah, he's leverage, insurance. You really think you can just walk in and take him? Snake's smarter than that. Before anyone could react, the rat lunged forward, shoving Big Jack backward. Danny stumbled, catching himself against the railing. Two more men burst out of the motel room, fists flying. Big Jack recovered quickly, his massive frame absorbing the first punch before delivering one of his own. The sound of flesh meeting flesh echoed in the narrow walkway. Chuck and Diesel rushed up the stairs, joining the fray. The fight was brutal but brief. Years of street brawls had taught Big Jack everything he needed to know about surviving. He ducked under a wild swing, caught his attacker with an uppercut that sent him sprawling. Beside him, Chuck grappled with another man, while Diesel had the rat pinned against the wall. "The steel mill!" the rat choked out as Diesel's forearm pressed against his throat. "Snake's got him at the old steel mill, that's all I know, I swear." Big Jack grabbed the rat's collar, pulling him close. "If you're lying..." "I'm not! On my mother's grave!" The rat's eyes were wide with fear now. "But you're walking into a trap, Jack. Snake's been waiting for this." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Someone must have called the cops. "Time to go!" Chuck shouted, already heading for the stairs. Big Jack released the rat, who slumped against the wall, coughing. He scooped up Danny, who had stayed hidden during the fight, and rushed down the metal stairs. Their boots thundered against the steps as they ran for their bikes. Spider had the engines running. They mounted up quickly, Danny clinging to Big Jack's back as they roared out of the parking lot. The sound of their engines echoed off the buildings as they disappeared into the night, leaving the flashing police lights behind. Several blocks away, they pulled into an empty gas station to regroup. Danny's face was pale, but his eyes were determined. "Are we going to the steel mill?" he asked, his voice steady despite everything that had happened. Big Jack looked at his crew, saw the same resolve in their faces that he felt in his heart. They had what they needed, a location. The old steel mill had been abandoned for years, the perfect place for Snake to hide. "Yeah, kid," Big Jack said, checking his knuckles where the skin had split during the fight. "We're going to get your brother back." The old steel mill loomed against the starless sky, a hulking shadow of rust and broken dreams. Moonlight filtered through holes in the corrugated metal roof, casting strange patterns on the debris-strewn floor. Big Jack cut the engine of his bike a block away, and his crew followed suit. "Stay close," he whispered to Danny as they approached on foot. The boy nodded, his small hand gripping the back of Jack's leather jacket. Chuck took point, years of experience making his footsteps silent despite his size. Spider brought up the rear, constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of movement. The air inside the mill was thick with the metallic tang of rust and something else. Fear. They moved past ancient machinery, their shapes distorted in the dim light like sleeping giants. Every step had to be calculated. The floor was littered with broken glass and twisted metal. Danny's breathing was quick but controlled, trying his best to stay quiet just as Big Jack had taught him. "Look," Diesel whispered, pointing to fresh tire tracks in the dust. Big Jack nodded. They were in the right place. The tracks led toward the back of the mill, where the processing area used to be. As they got closer, they could make out a faint light seeping through the cracks of a door. The group pressed themselves against the wall, inching forward. Through a broken window they could see into what must have been an old office space. The room had been cleared out, except for a large metal cage in the corner. Inside, illuminated by a single bare bulb, was Tommy. Danny's breath caught in his throat. His brother was sitting with his knees pulled up to his chest, his clothes dirty and torn. A dark bruise marked his cheek, but he was alive. The sight made Big Jack's blood boil. "2 guards," Spider reported in a barely audible whisper. "By the door, armed." Big Jack sized up the situation. The guards were lounging in chairs, looking bored, their weapons within easy reach but not in their hands. Sloppy. Their overconfidence would be their downfall. He motioned to Chuck and Diesel, indicating they should circle around to the other entrance. Spider would stay with Danny, keeping him safe while Big Jack created a distraction. The plan worked perfectly. When Big Jack deliberately knocked over a piece of metal, the guards jumped to attention, moving to investigate the noise. Chuck and Diesel struck from behind, taking them down without a sound. "Tommy!" Danny broke free from Spider's grip, rushing toward the cage the moment the guards were subdued. Tommy's head snapped up, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Danny?" His voice was hoarse but strong. Big Jack made quick work of the padlock with a pair of bolt cutters, and the brothers collided in a fierce embrace. Tommy was trembling, his arms wrapped tightly around his twin as if afraid Danny might disappear. "I knew you'd come," Tommy whispered into his brother's shoulder. "I knew you wouldn't leave me." "Never," Danny replied, tears streaming down his face. "Big Jack helped me find you. He promised we would." Tommy looked up at the towering biker with grateful eyes. But before he could speak, the quiet was shattered by the sound of multiple boots on metal. The main doors burst open with a thunderous crash, flooding the space with harsh fluorescent light. Snake's gang poured in from all sides, weapons raised, their faces twisted with malice. They had walked right into a trap, just as the rat had warned them. The first shot rang out like thunder, sending sparks flying as it ricocheted off a metal beam near Big Jack's head. He shoved the twins behind a massive piece of machinery, his body shielding them from the spray of bullets. "Stay down!" he roared over the deafening gunfire. The mill erupted into chaos, the air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the metallic ping of bullets striking steel. Chuck and Diesel dove behind old equipment, returning fire when they could. Spider had found cover behind an overturned forklift, his steady hands never missing a shot. Tommy wrapped his arms around Danny, both boys pressed flat against the cold concrete floor. Their hearts pounded in unison as the battle raged around them. Big Jack could see the fear in their eyes, but also the trust they placed in him. "Well, well, well," a voice cut through the din of combat. "If it isn't the mighty Big Jack, playing hero." The gunfire ceased abruptly. Snake emerged from the shadows, his lean figure illuminated by the harsh industrial lights. His leather jacket was adorned with patches that marked him as an outcast, a traitor to the Brotherhood. A cruel smile played across his face as he walked forward, each step deliberate and menacing. "You always did have a soft spot for lost causes, Jack," Snake taunted, his voice dripping with contempt. "How many of your brothers died because of that weakness?" Big Jack's grip tightened on his weapon. "This ends tonight, Snake. You crossed a line when you took the boy." Snake laughed, the sound echoing off the mill's walls. "Lines? There are no lines in our world, Jack. You taught me that, remember? Before you kicked me out of the Angels." "You got yourself kicked out," Jack growled. "Your own choices led you here." More gang members appeared from various entrances, their weapons trained on the surrounded bikers. The odds were getting worse by the second. Jack counted at least 15 armed men, all looking for blood. "You know what your problem is, Jack?" Snake circled like a predator. "You think you can wash away your past by playing the good guy? But we both know what you really are." Chuck tried to shift position, but a warning shot from one of Snake's men sent him back into cover. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. "The difference between us," Jack replied, his voice steady, is that I learned from my mistakes. You just kept making new ones." Snake's face darkened. He raised his hand, and his men tensed, ready to open fire. But instead of giving the order, he lowered it slowly, that cruel smile returning. "Fall back," Snake commanded, surprising everyone. His men hesitated. "I said fall back. We've had our fun for tonight." The gang members began retreating, keeping their weapons trained on Big Jack and his crew. Snake was the last to move towards the exit, walking backward with casual confidence. "Enjoy your victory, Jack," Snake called out. "While it lasts." The gang disappeared into the night, leaving behind an eerie silence broken only by the sound of distant engines roaring to life. Big Jack's crew remained in their defensive positions, weapons ready, waiting to make sure it wasn't another trick. After a long moment, Spider spoke up. "They're gone. For now." Big Jack helped the twins to their feet, checking them both for injuries. Tommy was shaking slightly, but his eyes were determined. Danny stood close to his brother, refusing to let go of his hand. The bikers gathered in the center of the mill, their faces grim. They had won this round, saved Tommy, but the cost of victory was yet to be determined. Snake wasn't done with them, not by a long shot. Big Jack surveyed the steel mill's main floor, his instincts screaming that something wasn't right. Snake's retreat had been too easy, too calculated. The old biker had seen enough traps in his day to know when one was being sprung. "We need to move," he announced, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. "Tommy, can you walk okay?" Tommy nodded, though his legs were still shaky. "Yeah, I think so." "Spider, take point," Big Jack ordered. "Chuck and Diesel, watch our backs. We're getting these boys out of here." The group moved cautiously toward the main entrance, their boots crunching on scattered debris. Danny kept close to his brother, one hand firmly gripping Tommy's sleeve, as if afraid he might disappear again. The reunited twins walked in perfect step, a habit formed over years of being inseparable. As they approached the first exit, Spider held up his fist, the signal to stop. He crouched down, examining something near the doorframe. His face went pale. "Jack," he called out softly, "we got a problem." Big Jack moved forward, careful to keep the twins behind him. In the dim light, he could see what had caught Spider's attention. Thin wires running along the floor, disappearing into the walls. "Everyone back," he commanded. "Now!" They retreated deeper into the mill, but before they could reach safety, a low rumble filled the air. The floor beneath their feet began to vibrate, sending loose tools and metal scraps dancing across the concrete. "The other exits!" Chuck shouted. "We need to—" His words were cut off by the first explosion. It came from their right, sending a fireball rolling across the ceiling. The heat hit them like a wave, forcing them to duck behind whatever cover they could find. "This way!" Big Jack grabbed both twins by their shoulders, steering them toward what he hoped was a clear path. The rest of the crew scattered, diving for cover as more explosions began to chain react through the building. The air filled with smoke and the screech of twisting metal. Support beams groaned overhead, threatening to give way at any moment. Big Jack could hear his crew shouting to each other, their voices barely audible over the chaos. "Jack!" Spider's voice cut through the din. "The loading dock! It might still be—" Another explosion drowned out his words. This one was closer, more powerful. The shockwave lifted Big Jack off his feet, sending him and the twins tumbling across the floor. They rolled behind a large piece of machinery, just as a section of the roof came crashing down, bringing with it a shower of sparks and twisted metal. When the dust settled enough to see, Big Jack's heart sank. The fallen debris had cut them off from the others. Through the gaps in the wreckage, he could make out Spider and the rest of the crew on the other side, but there was no way to reach them. "We're okay," Danny shouted, coughing from the smoke. Tommy's okay too. Big Jack pulled himself up, checking both boys for injuries. They were covered in dust, but otherwise unharmed. The same couldn't be said for their surroundings. Fires were spreading quickly, eating up anything flammable, and the air was getting harder to breathe. Through the smoke, he could hear Spider calling out, "Jack, can you hear me?" "We're alive," Big Jack shouted back. "But we're cut off. Get yourselves out." Another explosion rocked the building, closer this time. The twins pressed against Big Jack's sides as burning debris rained down around them. They were trapped, with fires spreading on all sides and no clear path to safety. The heat from the flames pressed in around them as Big Jack pulled both boys closer. Smoke curled through the air, making it hard to breathe. Tommy stumbled, still weak from his captivity, but Danny caught his arm, holding him steady. "Stay low," Big Jack ordered, his voice rough from the smoke. "The air's better down here." They crouched behind a massive piece of machinery, its metal surface hot to the touch. The twins pressed close together, their faces streaked with soot. Big Jack's eyes darted around, searching for a way out through the burning maze of twisted metal and fallen beams. A sharp crack split the air, gunfire, then another, and another. The sounds echoed off the mill's high ceiling, making it impossible to tell where they were coming from. "They're shooting at us?" Danny's voice trembled. "Not at us," Big Jack explained, straining to hear over the roar of the flames. "At the exits. Snake's making sure we can't get out." Tommy's shoulders tensed at the mention of Snake's name. He said this would happen. He told me he had something planned for when you came. Big Jack's jaw tightened. Of course, Snake would have gloated to his prisoner, showing off his twisted plan. That's how Snake operated, always trying to prove he was the smartest person in the room. More gunfire erupted, closer this time. Through the smoke, they could make out shadowy figures moving along the catwalks above. Snake's men were spreading out, taking up positions around the burning building. "We need to move," Big Jack whispered. "Stay close to me. Don't make a sound." They crawled forward, keeping to the shadows where they could. The twins moved in perfect sync, each watching out for the other. Every few feet, they'd pause as Big Jack checked their surroundings, making sure they weren't walking into an ambush. A bullet pinged off metal nearby, sending sparks flying. Danny flinched, but Tommy squeezed his hand. The bond between them was visible. Even after being separated, they found strength in each other. "This way," Big Jack motioned toward a section of the mill that seemed less damaged. "There might be a service exit back there." They hadn't made it halfway when more gunfire erupted. This time it was accompanied by Snake's voice, amplified and echoing through the burning building. "Coming to play hero, Jack?" Snake's laugh was cruel. "Just like old times, isn't it? Except this time you're not getting away." Big Jack pushed the boys behind a large concrete pillar. Through the smoke, he could see more of Snake's men filing in through a side entrance. They carried assault rifles and moved with military precision. These weren't ordinary gang members. "Get deeper into the mill," Big Jack ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's too many of them out here." They retreated further into the building's depths, where the smoke was thicker, but the gunfire more distant. The twins stayed close together, their footsteps nearly silent on the concrete floor. Big Jack brought up the rear, constantly checking behind them. Just as they found cover behind some old storage containers, a familiar silhouette appeared through the haze. Snake stood on a catwalk above them, flanked by armed men on both sides. His scarred face twisted into a smile as he spotted them below. "Nowhere left to run, old friend," Snake called out. More of his men appeared from different directions, their weapons trained on Big Jack and the twins. "Let's finish this properly, shall we?" The metal door behind them burst open with a thunderous crash. Snake's men turned, startled by the sudden interruption. Through the smoke and chaos stepped Ray, his weathered face set in grim determination. Behind him, a group of tough-looking bikers filed in, their leather vests bearing patches from different clubs. "Sorry I'm late to the party, Jack," Ray called out, his gravelly voice carrying across the burning mill. Big Jack's eyes widened in recognition. "Ray, I thought you were done with all this." "Some things are worth coming back for." Ray nodded toward the twins, especially when kids are involved. Snake snarled from his position on the catwalk. "Kill them all." But Ray's men were already moving. They spread out with practiced efficiency, taking cover behind machinery and pillars. The air filled with gunfire. But this time it wasn't just coming from Snake's direction. "Get the boys out," Ray shouted, ducking behind a concrete barrier. "We'll hold them off." Big Jack didn't waste time questioning his old friend's sudden appearance. He grabbed Danny and Tommy, keeping them low as they made their way toward Ray's position. The twins moved quickly, staying close together. "Through that door," Ray pointed to a side exit. "My guys cleared a path. There's bikes waiting outside." A bullet whizzed past, too close for comfort. Big Jack pushed the boys behind a large metal container, shielding them with his body. Ray's men provided covering fire, forcing Snake's group to retreat further into the shadows of the burning building. "Just like Angola in '92, Ray said with a grim smile, reloading his weapon. "Remember that mess?" "Yeah," Big Jack nodded, memories flooding back. "You saved my hide then too." Tommy tugged at Big Jack's sleeve. "The smoke's getting worse." He was right. The fire was spreading faster now, eating through the old building's structure. Somewhere above, metal groaned ominously. "Move," Ray ordered. "Now's our chance." They made a break for it. Ray's men laid down, suppressing fire, while Big Jack and the twins sprinted for the exit. Snake's angry shouts followed them, but his men were pinned down, unable to stop their escape. Outside, the cool night air hit them like a blessing. Several motorcycles idled nearby, their engines purring in the darkness. Big Jack helped the twins onto one of the bikes, making sure they were secure. Ray emerged last, backing out of the doorway with his weapon raised. That should keep them busy for a while. He turned to Big Jack, his expression softening. "Been a long time, brother?" "Too long," Big Jack agreed. There was so much left unsaid between them, years of shared history, both good and bad. "Ray, Save it," Ray cut him off, but his tone was gentle. "We both made our choices. Tonight I made a new one." He glanced at the twins. "Get them somewhere safe. Snake won't stop coming." The sound of sirens grew in the distance, police and fire trucks responding to the chaos at the mill. Ray mounted his bike, nodding to his men who were emerging from the building. "Thank you," Big Jack said simply, knowing it wasn't enough to cover everything between them. Ray's weathered face cracked into a slight smile. "Just don't make me come out of retirement again." He kicked his bike to life, the engine roaring in the night. Without another word, he and his men peeled away into the darkness, leaving Big Jack and the twins to make their own escape. The abandoned auto repair shop sat quiet on the outskirts of town, its weathered walls keeping secrets in the pre-dawn hours. Inside, Big Jack and his crew had found temporary sanctuary, their bikes hidden behind rolled-down metal shutters. The musty air carried the scent of old oil and rust, mixed with the metallic tang of blood from their various scrapes and cuts. Tommy sat on an old workbench, holding an ice pack to his bruised shoulder, while Danny stayed close by his side, refusing to let his twin out of his sight. The rest of the bikers sprawled across various surfaces, some on creaky chairs, others leaning against tool cabinets. "Snake's got himself holed up in that old prison complex," Buddy, one of Jack's most trusted men, reported. His face was streaked with soot from the mill fire. My contact says he's got at least 20 guys in there with him. Big Jack paced the concrete floor, his heavy boots echoing in the dim space. The fluorescent lights above flickered, casting strange shadows across his worried face. Ray's distraction bought us some time, but Snake won't stay quiet for long. We could try calling the cops, suggested Mike, dabbing at a cut above his eye. Snake's got half the force in his pocket. Big Jack shook his head. The other half's too scared to move against him. No, this ends with us. Danny watched the discussion from his spot next to Tommy, his young face showing a maturity beyond his years. The events of the past few hours had changed him. Changed all of them. The prison's built like a fortress, Buddy continued, spreading out a crude map on an old workbench. Main entrance is heavily guarded. Service entrance too. But there's an old tunnel system underneath. Used to be for emergency evacuations. The bikers gathered around the map, their leather vests creaking as they leaned in. Big Jack traced the tunnel routes with his finger, his expression grim but determined. We go in through the tunnels, he decided. Small team, quick and quiet. Get to Snake before he knows what hit him. Tommy shifted on the workbench, wincing. He'll be expecting something. That's why he let us escape. He wants you to come after him. Kid's right, one of the older bikers nodded. Snake's always thinking 3 steps ahead. Big Jack straightened up, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the floor. Then we'll give him exactly what he expects, and something he doesn't. We'll split into 2 teams. One group hits the front, makes all the noise they can. While Snake's men are dealing with them, the second team comes up through the tunnels. The plan started taking shape as the bikers discussed positions and timing. They'd need weapons, explosives for distractions, communication equipment. Each man knew their role, understood the risks. Danny slid off the workbench and approached Big Jack. His small frame barely came up to the biker's elbow, but his eyes held a fierce determination. I want to come with you, he said, his voice steady despite his obvious fear. The room fell silent. Big Jack looked down at the boy, seeing not just a child, but the courage that had driven them this far. Without Danny's determination to find his brother, none of them would have gotten involved in the first place. You sure about this, kid? Big Jack asked softly. It's going to be dangerous. Danny nodded, glancing back at Tommy. I didn't give up when they took my brother. I'm not giving up now. We finish this together. Big Jack placed a heavy hand on Danny's shoulder. You're right, kid. Your bravery's what got us this far. We finish this together. The other bikers nodded in approval, recognizing the truth in those words. The sun was starting to rise outside, painting the shop's dirty windows in shades of gold. It was time to prepare for the final confrontation. The garage door of the auto repair shop rolled up with a metallic groan as the first rays of morning sunlight spilled across the concrete floor. Big Jack stood before his assembled crew, his weathered face set with grim determination. 20 hardened bikers formed a semicircle around him, checking their weapons and adjusting their leather vests. Remember, Big Jack's deep voice carried across the space. Team 1 hits the front gate hard. Make it look good. They need to believe you're the main assault. He turned to the smaller group on his left. Team 2, we go in through the tunnels, quick and quiet. Danny stood close to Big Jack, wearing an oversized leather vest that one of the younger bikers had given him. His small frame was dwarfed by the bikers around him, but his eyes showed the same steely resolve as the men preparing for battle. Check your radios, Buddy called out, distributing earpieces. Channel 3 for Team 1, Channel 4 for Tunnel Team. Keep the chatter minimal. The bikers moved with practiced efficiency, loading ammunition and securing their gear. The air was thick with tension and the smell of gun oil. Some of the men exchanged quiet words or brief embraces. They all knew the stakes. Tommy stays here with Ray, Big Jack announced, looking at the injured boy. Keep the engines running. If something goes wrong, You get him out of here fast." Tommy tried to protest, but winced from his injuries. Danny gave his twin a quick hug before returning to Big Jack's side. The bond between the brothers was visible in their shared look of concern and determination. The roar of motorcycle engines filled the air as Team 1 mounted their bikes. The morning light glinted off chrome and steel as 20 machines rumbled to life. Big Jack's smaller group climbed into 2 unmarked vans, their equipment stored carefully in the back. The convoy moved out, splitting up at the first intersection. The larger group of bikers thundered down the main road toward the prison's front gate, while the vans took a quieter route toward the abandoned maintenance entrance that would lead them to the tunnels. In the van, Danny sat between Big Jack and Buddy, his small hands gripping the seat as they bounced along the rough road. The other men checked their weapons one final time, their faces masks of concentration. They heard the attack begin through their earpieces, the roar of motorcycles, shouts, and the first shots being fired. Big Jack's team moved quickly through the entrance and into the darkness of the tunnels, flashlights cutting through the gloom. The underground passages were a maze of concrete and steel, their footsteps echoing despite their attempts at stealth. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, and the air grew thick with dust and tension. They emerged into the prison complex through a maintenance shaft, catching the first group of guards by surprise. The fight was brutal, but quick. Big Jack's team had the advantage of surprise and years of experience. As they pushed deeper into the complex, the sounds of the battle outside grew louder. Gunfire echoed through the corridors, mixed with shouts and the crash of breaking glass. They found Snake in the old prison control room, surrounded by his lieutenants. He stood there with a cruel smile, as if he'd been waiting for them. "Jack," he called out, his voice dripping with mock friendliness. "Bringing a kid to a gunfight? That's low, even for you." The room erupted into chaos. Bullets flew as both sides opened fire, taking cover behind old equipment and concrete pillars. Big Jack moved with surprising speed for his size, closing the distance to Snake. The 2 men crashed together in a brutal exchange of blows. Snake fought dirty, using a hidden knife that caught the light as it slashed through the air. Big Jack managed to knock it away, landing a heavy punch that sent Snake staggering. Just as Big Jack moved in for the final blow, a deafening explosion rocked the building. The blast came from somewhere below, sending shockwaves through the floor and raining debris from the ceiling. Everyone scrambled for cover as smoke filled the room, and support beams groaned ominously above them. The explosion sent tremors through the entire building, knocking everyone off their feet. Chunks of concrete rained down from the ceiling as thick clouds of dust filled the air. The fluorescent lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness broken only by emergency lights that cast an eerie red glow. Big Jack pushed himself up from the floor, his ears ringing from the blast. "Danny!" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "Danny, where are you?" The dust was so thick he could barely see 3 feet in front of him. Coughing and stumbling, Big Jack made his way through the debris. The room had completely transformed. What was once an organized space was now a maze of fallen beams and shattered equipment. Water sprayed from broken pipes, turning the dust into a grimy paste that coated everything. "Boss!" Buddy's voice came from somewhere to his left. "Over here!" Through the haze, Big Jack could make out Buddy's silhouette helping other bikers to their feet. Some were injured, bleeding from cuts caused by flying debris. Snake and his men were nowhere to be seen. "Has anyone seen the kid?" Big Jack's voice boomed across the destroyed room. The responding silence made his heart sink. Another explosion rocked the building, smaller this time but closer. The floor beneath them groaned ominously. "We need to move!" someone shouted. "The whole place is coming down!" Big Jack's mind raced. Danny had been right beside him when the first explosion hit. He spun around, scanning the room desperately. Emergency exit signs glowed dimly through the dust, pointing toward safety. But he couldn't leave. Not without finding Danny first. "Check every corner," he ordered his men. "Find that boy." The bikers spread out, calling Danny's name as they searched. The building continued to creak and groan around them, with small pieces of ceiling regularly breaking free and crashing to the floor. Through his earpiece, Big Jack heard the team outside reporting chaos at the front gate. The explosion had triggered a full-scale riot, with prisoners and guards alike scrambling for cover. "Jack!" It was Ray's voice through the radio. "The kid, he made it outside somehow. I saw him near the east wall, but there was another blast. He's trapped behind some fallen concrete." Big Jack's heart leapt into his throat. "Is he hurt?" "Can't tell from here," Ray replied, his voice crackling with static. "There's too much smoke, but he was moving." "Hold your position," Big Jack commanded. He turned to his crew, who were still searching the room. "Danny's outside. East wall, move!" The bikers regrouped quickly, helping their injured comrades. They made their way through the crumbling building, ducking under fallen beams and climbing over debris. Every few seconds, another small explosion would rock the compound, sending more dust and debris raining down. The air grew clearer as they approached an exit, but the heat intensified. Flames had broken out in several places, feeding on exposed electrical wiring and whatever else they could find. The fire's orange glow cast dancing shadows on the walls. Finally, they burst through an emergency exit into the morning air. The scene outside was chaos. Fires burned everywhere, alarms blared, and people ran in all directions. The east wall of the compound was partially collapsed, creating a mountain of broken concrete and twisted metal. "Danny!" Big Jack bellowed, running toward the wall. His massive frame moved with surprising speed as he began searching through the rubble. The rest of his crew spread out, calling the boy's name as they climbed over the debris. Somewhere in this mess, Danny was trapped, and Big Jack was determined to find him, even if he had to move every piece of concrete with his bare hands. Danny coughed as another cloud of dust swept over him. The heat from nearby fires made his eyes water, but he blinked the tears away and kept moving. All around him, chunks of concrete and twisted metal created a maze of destruction. The emergency lights cast strange shadows that danced across the debris, making everything look alien and threatening. "Tommy!" he called out, his voice hoarse from the smoke. "Tommy, where are you?" A small explosion somewhere in the building made him jump, but Danny refused to let fear stop him. He thought about Big Jack, about how the big biker had risked everything to help him. Danny wouldn't let that courage go to waste. He had to find his brother. The boy scrambled over a fallen beam, his small size allowing him to squeeze through gaps that would stop an adult. His jeans were torn at the knees, and his hands were scraped raw from climbing over rough concrete, but he barely noticed the pain. All that mattered was finding Tommy. "I promised I'd never leave you behind," Danny whispered to himself as he pushed forward. The twins had made that promise to each other years ago, after their parents died. They were all each other had left. Water from broken pipes dripped everywhere, turning the dust into a slippery mud that made moving dangerous. Danny's sneakers kept sliding on the wet concrete, forcing him to move carefully. The sound of distant sirens mixed with the crackling of fires and the groaning of stressed metal. He reached a partially collapsed wall and found a small opening near the bottom. Danny got down on his hands and knees, ignoring the sharp pieces of debris that dug into his palms. The space was tight, but he could just barely fit through. "Tommy!" he called again as he emerged on the other side. This area was darker, with only a few emergency lights still working. Danny pulled out his small flashlight, the one Big Jack had given him, just in case, and swept the beam across the room. The light caught something familiar, a blue sleeve, the same color as the shirt Tommy had been wearing. Danny's heart leaped into his throat. "Tommy!" He scrambled forward, nearly tripping in his haste. There, half hidden behind a fallen filing cabinet, lay his brother. Tommy was unconscious, a small cut on his forehead leaving a trail of dried blood down his face. But he was breathing. Danny could see his chest rising and falling steadily. "I found you," Danny said, his voice breaking with relief. "I found you, Tommy. Now we just have to get out of here." Another explosion rocked the building, closer this time. Pieces of ceiling rained down, and Danny knew they couldn't stay here. He grabbed Tommy under the arms and started pulling, just like they'd learned in school during emergency drills. Tommy was heavier than Danny expected, or maybe it was just that Danny was tired from everything that had happened. But he refused to give up. Inch by inch, he dragged his unconscious brother across the debris-strewn floor. "Come on, Tommy," Danny grunted as he pulled. "We're getting out of here together. I promised, remember? We stick together no matter what." The heat from the fires was getting worse, and smoke was starting to fill the lower levels of the room. Danny could hear more explosions in the distance, each one sending tremors through the building. But he kept moving, kept pulling his brother toward what he hoped was safety. His arms burned with effort, and his lungs ached from the smoke. But Danny didn't stop. He thought about Big Jack, about how the big biker never gave up, no matter how tough things got. Danny would be just as strong. He had to be, for Tommy. Through the smoke and falling debris, Big Jack's massive frame emerged like a shadow in the haze. His leather jacket was covered in dust, and blood trickled from a cut above his eye. When he spotted Danny dragging Tommy's unconscious body, his eyes widened with both relief and concern. "Danny!" Big Jack's voice boomed over the chaos. He rushed forward, carefully stepping over twisted metal and broken concrete. "Thank God you're alive!" Danny looked up, his face streaked with tears and soot. "Big Jack, Tommy's hurt. He won't wake up." Without hesitation, Big Jack scooped Tommy up in his arms. The boy looked small against the biker's broad chest. "You did good, kid. Real good. But we gotta move, now!" The sound of gunfire echoed through the compound, followed by angry shouts. Snake's men were getting closer. Big Jack grabbed Danny's hand with his free arm, and they started running through the maze of destruction. "This way." Big Jack pulled them behind a partially collapsed wall just as bullets whizzed past. The concrete exploded where they had been standing moments before. Danny pressed himself against the wall, his heart pounding. "Is Tommy going to be okay?" Big Jack checked Tommy's pulse again. "He's strong, just like his brother. But we need to get him to a doctor." More explosions rocked the building. Parts of the ceiling crashed down nearby, sending up clouds of choking dust. Big Jack pulled a bandana from his pocket and tied it around Danny's face to help him breathe. "Jack," a familiar voice called out. Through the smoke, 3 of Jack's fellow bikers appeared, their weapons ready. "The south exit is clear. We got bikes waiting." "Move, move," Big Jack ordered, pushing Danny ahead of him while cradling Tommy. The group ran through the compound, ducking under fallen beams and jumping over debris. The heat from the fires was intense, and sweat poured down their faces. They were almost at the exit when Snake's laugh echoed through the halls. "Leaving so soon, Jack?" Big Jack spun around. Snake stood at the end of the corridor, holding what looked like a detonator. His face was twisted in a cruel smile. "One click," Snake taunted, "and this whole place comes down, with all of you in it." Danny grabbed Big Jack's jacket. "Please, we have to help Tommy." Something in Danny's voice must have reached Snake's men. 2 of them exchanged uncertain looks. They hadn't signed up to hurt kids. In that moment of hesitation, one of Jack's bikers threw a smoke grenade. The corridor filled with thick smoke. Snake cursed and started firing blindly. Big Jack shielded the boys with his body as they ran for the exit. Behind them, more explosions thundered through the building. They burst out into the cool night air. Motorcycles roared to life as Jack's crew prepared for their escape. Big Jack carefully handed Tommy to one of his most trusted riders. "Get him to the hospital," he ordered. "We'll be right behind you." Danny climbed onto Big Jack's motorcycle, wrapping his arms tightly around the big man's waist. The engines revved in unison, and the group of bikers peeled away from the crumbling compound just as another explosion lit up the night sky. Through the rearview mirror, Big Jack watched Snake's compound collapse in on itself. But his thoughts weren't on Snake or revenge anymore. They were focused on getting Tommy the help he needed. The unconscious boy was secured safely in the sidecar of the lead bike, racing towards the hospital under the protection of Jack's most loyal men. The neon signs cast a soft glow over the familiar bar, now filled with weary bikers nursing their drinks. Big Jack sat at his usual spot, his bandaged hands wrapped around a cold beer. The victory they'd achieved felt hollow somehow, weighted down by the cost of the fight. Around him, his brothers tried to keep their spirits up. Some laughed, sharing stories of close calls during the rescue. Others sat in silence, their faces showing the exhaustion of the battle. The walls still held the same old photographs and memories, but something had changed. The air felt heavier, filled with unspoken words. "To Tommy and Danny," someone called out, raising a glass. The bikers joined in the toast, their voices a low rumble. Big Jack lifted his beer, but couldn't bring himself to drink. His mind kept going back to the explosion, to the moment when he thought he'd lost both boys. One of his oldest friends, Mike, slid onto the bar stool next to him. His leather jacket was torn, and a fresh bandage covered his forearm. "You did good, Jack. Those boys are alive because of you." Big Jack stared at his reflection in the mirror behind the bar. The cut above his eye had stopped bleeding, but the bruises were starting to show. "We lost good men today, Mike. Was it worth it?" "Look over there." Mike nodded toward a quiet corner of the bar. In a worn leather booth, Danny sat next to his brother Tommy. The younger boy's head rested against his twin's shoulder, their hands clasped tightly together. Tommy was still pale, with bandages visible under his borrowed t-shirt, but he was alive. The doctors had said he would make a full recovery. Danny caught Big Jack's eye and smiled, a genuine, grateful smile that seemed to light up the dim bar. It was the kind of smile that reminded Jack why they'd fought so hard. "Yeah," Big Jack muttered, his voice rough with emotion. "Yeah, it was worth it." The bartender, an old friend who'd seen the club through countless battles, set down fresh drinks in front of Jack and Mike. "On the house," he said quietly, "for bringing those boys home." More bikers filtered into the bar as the night wore on. Some bore fresh bandages, others limped slightly, but they all came to pay their respects. They'd lost 3 brothers in the fight against Snake's gang, and their absence hung heavy in the air. Big Jack watched as Danny whispered something to Tommy, making his twin brother laugh softly. Despite everything they'd been through, the boys still had each other. That counted for something. Mike cleared his throat. "Snake's gone. His whole operation crumbled with that compound. The cops found his body in the rubble." Big Jack nodded slowly. There was no satisfaction in the news, just a tired acceptance. "Good." Danny carefully helped Tommy to his feet, and together they made their way to where Big Jack sat. Tommy's steps were unsteady, but his eyes were clear and determined. "Thank you," Tommy said simply, his voice still hoarse, "for coming for me, for helping Danny." Big Jack looked at the twins, one who'd shown incredible courage seeking help, the other who'd endured so much. They were just kids, but they'd shown more strength than many grown men he knew. "I made a promise," Big Jack replied, his gruff voice softening. "And in this club, we keep our promises." Danny's eyes welled up with tears, but he was smiling. He reached out and grabbed Big Jack's hand, squeezing it tightly. No words were needed. The gesture said everything. In that moment, surrounded by his brothers and watching over the twins, Big Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the false peace that came from victory in battle, but the real, quiet peace that came from knowing you'd done the right thing, no matter the cost. The morning sun filtered through the bar's dusty windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Big Jack watched as Danny helped Tommy adjust his sling, the gentle care between the twins touching something deep in his heart. The past few days had left their marks on all of them. Bandages, bruises, and memories that wouldn't soon fade. "Easy there," Danny said softly as Tommy winced. "The doctor said to take it slow." Tommy managed a small smile. "I'm okay, just stiff." Big Jack shifted in his chair, his own injuries protesting the movement. The cut above his eye had started to heal, but his ribs still ached with every breath. Yet watching the boys together made the pain seem distant, almost insignificant. Several bikers lounged around the bar, some dozing in chairs, others quietly talking over coffee. The usual morning crowd had given them space, sensing that this was a time for healing and reflection. "You boys hungry?" Big Jack asked, his voice gentler than usual. "Mary's Diner makes a mean breakfast." Danny's face lit up. "Can we, Tommy? Are you feeling up to it?" Tommy nodded, and Big Jack couldn't help but notice how the boy's eyes had changed. There was a new depth there, a kind of quiet strength that came from surviving something terrible. It reminded him of Danny's determination when he'd first walked into the bar, seeking help. As they settled into a booth at Mary's, Big Jack found himself studying the twins. They moved in sync, even now, anticipating each other's needs without speaking. Danny automatically passed Tommy the sugar for his hot chocolate, while Tommy slid the menu closer to his brother's side of the table. "You know," Big Jack said, breaking the comfortable silence, "what you boys did, both of you, that was something special." He cleared his throat, unused to expressing such thoughts. "Danny, coming to find help, that took real courage. And Tommy, holding on like you did." The twins exchanged a look, one of those silent conversations that only they could understand. Then Danny spoke up, his voice steady. "We couldn't have done it without you, Big Jack. You kept your promise." A waitress arrived with plates of pancakes and eggs, but Big Jack barely noticed the food. He was too caught up in the realization of how much these boys had come to mean to him. They weren't just some kids he'd helped. They'd become family. Around them, the diner buzzed with morning activity. Regular customers nodded respectfully to Big Jack as they passed, some stopping to pat the boys on the shoulder or offer quiet words of support. The story of the rescue had spread through town, growing with each telling. Tommy carefully cut his pancakes one-handed, refusing help but accepting Danny's quiet presence beside him. "Will you still visit us?" he asked suddenly, looking up at Big Jack. "After everything settles down?" The question caught Big Jack off guard, but the answer came easily. "Try and stop me, kid." He managed to smile, though his eyes were suspiciously bright. "Someone's got to keep an eye on you two." One by one, other bikers began filing into the diner. They came to say goodbye, each one taking a moment to ruffle the boys' hair or share a few words. The atmosphere was bittersweet. The end of one chapter, but not the end of the story. Mike, sporting fresh bandages on his arm, squeezed Big Jack's shoulder. "We'll be heading out soon. The road's calling." Danny and Tommy watched the bikers gather, their expressions a mix of gratitude and sadness. They sat close together, shoulders touching. Two parts of a whole finally reunited. The morning light caught their faces, highlighting the peace that had settled over them. A peace hard-won, but precious for its cost. The afternoon sun warmed the bar's wooden porch as Big Jack and Danny sat on the steps. The street was quiet, with only the occasional car passing by. Danny picked at a loose thread on his jeans, his shoulders hunched with worry. "What's eating at you, kid?" Big Jack asked, noticing the boy's troubled expression. He'd seen that look before, the same one Danny had worn when he first walked into the bar seeking help. Danny kicked at a small pebble, watching it skitter across the concrete. "Everything's going to change now, isn't it?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Going back to school, seeing our old friends, it all feels weird." He glanced up at Big Jack. "How do you just go back to normal after something like this?" Big Jack shifted on the step, his leather jacket creaking. He understood the feeling all too well. That strange disconnect between extraordinary moments and everyday life. "Nothing wrong with feeling that way, Danny. Truth is, normal's different for everyone." "But what if I can't handle it?" Danny's words tumbled out faster now, like he'd been holding them back. "The other kids at school, they won't understand. And Tommy's still hurt, and I keep having these dreams where—" He stopped abruptly, blinking hard. Big Jack placed his large hand gently on Danny's shoulder. "Hey, look at me for a second." He waited until Danny met his eyes. "You're one of the bravest kids I've ever met. You walked into a biker bar all by yourself to save your brother. That takes guts most grown men don't have." A ghost of a smile crossed Danny's face, but worry still clouded his eyes. "But that was different. I had you helping me then." "And you think that's going to change?" Big Jack raised an eyebrow. "I made you a promise, remember? Doesn't end just 'cause we got Tommy back." Inside the bar, they could hear Tommy laughing at something one of the bikers had said. The sound seemed to ease some of the tension in Danny's shoulders. "Really?" Danny asked, hope creeping into his voice. "You'll still be around?" "Kid, you and Tommy?" Big Jack paused, choosing his words carefully. "You're family now, both of you, and family sticks together." He gestured towards the bar. "All these guys? They feel the same way. You've got a whole crew watching your back now." Danny's eyes widened slightly. "Even when things go back to normal?" "Especially then." Big Jack nodded firmly. "Look, things might be different for a while. That's okay. You take it one day at a time, and when it gets tough, 'cause it will sometimes, you remember you're not alone in this." The sound of approaching footsteps made them both turn. Tommy appeared in the doorway, his arm still in its sling but a smile on his face. "What are you guys doing out here?" "Just having a chat," Big Jack said, standing up with a slight groan. He offered his hand to Danny, pulling him to his feet. "About family." Danny looked between his brother and Big Jack, and for the first time that afternoon, his smile reached his eyes. The worry wasn't completely gone, but it had softened, replaced by something stronger, the knowledge that whatever came next, they would face it together. "Come on," Big Jack said, guiding both boys towards the door. "I think Mary's got a fresh apple pie with our names on it." The rumble of Big Jack's Harley filled the afternoon air as he and Danny cruised down the empty highway. The boy sat behind him, arms wrapped tightly around Jack's waist, his small helmet pressed against the biker's leather-clad back. The wind whipped around them, carrying away the weight of everything they'd been through. Jack felt Danny's grip tighten as they leaned into a gentle curve. The kid was getting used to riding, learning to move with the bike instead of fighting against it. It reminded Jack of his own first rides, back when the world seemed simpler. They passed fields of golden wheat swaying in the breeze, the late summer sun painting everything in warm hues. Other members of the club rode alongside them, their bikes forming a protective circle around Jack and Danny. The thunder of their engines echoed off the hills. a familiar sound that had always meant home to Jack. "You doing okay back there?" Jack called over his shoulder, feeling Danny nod against his back. The boy had been quiet since they'd left town, but it wasn't the worried silence from before. This was different, peaceful almost. Jack understood. Sometimes the road had a way of clearing your head better than any words could. Through his rearview mirror, Jack caught glimpses of Danny's face. The boy's eyes were wide, taking in everything around them. There was something new there, replacing the fear that had lived in those eyes just days ago. Hope, maybe, or strength. Probably both. The rest of the club fell into formation behind them, brothers who'd stood with Jack through thick and thin. They'd all changed since Danny walked into their bar that night. The kid had reminded them what it meant to be part of something bigger than themselves. A few miles down the road, they pulled over at a scenic overlook. The valley stretched out below them, painted in shades of gold and green. Danny hopped off the bike first, his legs a bit wobbly, but his smile bright. "That was amazing," he exclaimed, pulling off his helmet. His hair stuck up in all directions, but he didn't seem to care. "Did you see how fast we were going when we—" "Not too fast," Jack cut in quickly, throwing a warning look at the other bikers who were trying not to laugh. "Your brother would kill me." Danny grinned, knowing full well they'd been pushing the speed limit. He walked to the guardrail, looking out over the valley. The other bikers gathered around, sharing water bottles and stories, their laughter carrying on the wind. Jack watched them all, feeling something he hadn't experienced in years. A lightness in his chest, a sense that maybe the world wasn't as dark as he'd thought. The kid had done that, had reminded them all what it meant to fight for something pure and true. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. It was time to head back. As they mounted their bikes, Jack noticed Danny staring at the sunset with a peaceful expression. "Ready to go home, kid?" Danny nodded, securing his helmet. "Yeah, but can we do this again sometime?" "Count on it," Jack promised, starting up his bike. The engines roared to life one by one, a symphony of power and brotherhood. As they pulled away from the overlook, Jack felt Danny's arms wrap around his waist again, secure and trusting. The rest of the club fell in behind them, their bikes gleaming in the golden light. They rode toward the setting sun, a family forged in steel and loyalty, knowing they'd found something worth protecting in a boy who'd been brave enough to ask for help. The evening crowd had thinned out at the bar, leaving behind the comfortable silence that Big Jack had always appreciated. He sat at his usual spot, nursing a beer, the amber liquid catching the dim light from above. The familiar scents of leather, motor oil, and stale beer filled the air. But something felt different tonight. Better, somehow. From his seat, he could see Danny and Tommy sitting at a table with some of the younger bikers. The twins were sharing a plate of fries, and Tommy was gesturing wildly, probably telling one of his stories about their adventure. Danny caught his brother's enthusiasm, adding his own details with bright eyes and quick hands. The bikers around them leaned in, genuinely interested in what the boys had to say. Jack took another sip of his beer, letting the moment sink in. Just weeks ago, this same bar had been where it all started, where a scared little boy had walked in with nothing but a drawing and desperate hope. Now that same boy sat there laughing, his brother safe beside him, surrounded by men who would die to protect them both. The overhead lights cast a warm glow over the scene, and Jack noticed how the boys' shadows stretched across the wooden floor, intertwining with those of the bikers. It was fitting, he thought, how their lives had become so tangled together. These kids weren't just some random rescue mission anymore. They were family. One of the bikers said something that made both boys burst out laughing. The sound echoed through the bar, pure and uninhibited. It was the kind of laughter that could only come from feeling completely safe, completely at home. Jack felt his chest tighten with emotion he wasn't used to feeling. Tommy caught his eye across the room and gave him a small wave. The bruises on his face were fading now, turning from angry purple to yellowed edges. But his eyes were bright and clear, showing no trace of the fear that had haunted them during his captivity. Danny followed his brother's gaze and beamed at Jack, his face lighting up with that same unwavering trust he'd shown since the beginning. The other bikers in the bar moved around them with careful consideration, treating the boys like precious cargo. Even the toughest among them had softened around the edges, offering high fives and gentle hair ruffles as they passed. These men, who lived their lives on the edge of society's acceptance, had found something worth protecting in these two kids. Jack watched as Danny shared the last French fry with his brother, their synchronized movements showing the deep bond they shared. It struck him then how close they'd come to losing this, to having this simple moment of brotherly love shattered forever. But they hadn't lost it. They'd fought for it, bled for it, and won it back. The jukebox in the corner played an old country song, its melody mixing with the boys' laughter and the low murmur of conversation. Jack felt the tension in his shoulders release, watching Tommy lean against his brother's shoulder, tired but content. Danny wrapped an arm around him protectively, their bond stronger than ever. A small smile tugged at the corners of Jack's mouth as he watched them, pride swelling in his chest. Sometimes, keeping a promise is the greatest victory of all. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.